Hey, what's going on, everyone? Thanks for joining us. You're listening to Building Pickleball, where I interview pickleball company and brand founders to uncover their story as a founder, their idea, setbacks, failures, and their contribution to the fastest growing sport, which is pickleball. Our guest today is Jonathan Clay, founder of Kitch Pickleball. Jonathan, thanks again for joining us. And can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and Kitch?
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the show. So Kitch Pickleball, we're an online retail and custom apparel company. Been around in pickleball since for the last 7 years. We actually launched year two of the US Open, kind of after seeing the growth of not only the US Open itself, but the sport as a whole over the course of the first year we were involved. We launched, and ever since then we've been off to the races. It's been a very interesting ride, to say the least. We're one of those companies that has been around since before I'll call the craze of pickleball. So seeing it in kind of that very early infant stage as it was starting to boil, and then now to full blown on fire in a matter of 5 to 6 short years. It's been a pretty crazy journey. So yeah, retail apparel. We're starting to get into some accessories and other products, but our goal is really to try and be that lifestyle apparel brand for the sport of pickleball. And be a little bit of a disruptor to the quote unquote big brands that are starting to come in already, and I'm predicting going to definitely come in the coming year or two. So that's kind of who we are.
Awesome, thanks. So you had mentioned you've had this company going around for 16 years. How did it like initially start out? Like what was kind of like the idea that started out compared to like what it is now?
So oddly enough, we actually started in racquetball. I started playing racquetball in college and got heavily involved in my college team. Got sponsored by a racket company. Started playing tournaments. Ran my college team. Interned for a racket company. So sort of throughout my college days, I was always interested in entrepreneurship, and I was able to do some kind of cool work for various racquetball companies. Coming out of college, I went to grad school, and while I was in grad school, I taught myself graphic design because I was bored in class, and started like kicking around designing like funny racquetball T-shirts. I was still at that point going to like 25 tournaments a year. I started stringing rackets at tournaments to kind of pay for entry fees and travel and hotels and stuff. Um, Put out some T-shirts on a table, and kind of spiraled that essentially into a racquetball clothing company. Over the course of probably the next 10 years after that, we developed ourselves into the largest brand in the sport of racquetball that didn't make a racket. So, if you took out all the companies that actually made the products you play the sport with, we were pretty much the largest brand name in it. Um, did that for a long, long time, built up a huge following in that sport, worked with probably 50 plus pros, various pro tours, USA Racquetball. We did all the uniforms for Team USA. So through racquetball, I had my apparel on ESPN and the Pan Am Games and some really cool world championship type stuff. And then about 7 years ago, two friends of mine in racquetball were the people who ran Wilson, which was a racket company. They left Wilson to found the US Open Pickleball Championships. And I was doing a lot of work with them in racquetball. They knew who I was. I was doing all their, t-shirt printing and custom apparel, and they needed someone to do it for the US Open. And when they first told me about the US Open of pickleball, I had no idea what pickleball was, never heard of it, never saw it, never saw a paddle, didn't even have a clue the sport existed. So I kind of got brought in at first, essentially as like a vendor, I guess you'd call it. I was just brought down to the US Open to sell t-shirts. And year one, I was just blown away, by the sport. And, it seemed like there was a gap in the market for, a quote unquote cool, hip, different youth based clothing company. And that's kind of what our brand name and brand focus was in racquetball for at that point over a decade. So I took a year after the first US Open, designed all the initial apparel launch, did the website, came up with the brand, did it all. And then when we went back to the US Open for year two, that's when we officially launched the company. Um, So it was is an interesting kind of really weird route into pickleball for sure. Um, but what's nice about it is, we were able to sort of figure out the system of this business in racquetball, throughout my 20s when I didn't know what the heck I was doing, and made all the, I guess I could say I made all the big mistakes, in that sport. So now the mistakes I make on a daily basis are the small ones in this sport. So that's kind of the route we took. It's interesting, it's different. And now fast forward to today, I'm still involved in racquetball, but the sport is kind of not the same as it was, when my racquetball company was in its heyday. But we still are involved in the sport. But I am, even as an athlete, player, whatever you want to call me, I am heavily all pickleball now, and very very little bit of racquetball in my life.
Seems to be the kind of like ongoing, kind of like a common story now that pickleball's taking over different facets of people's lives. Used to be like
Yeah.
something might be about tennis, and now pickleball is kind of dominating and taking over that part of life. But you mentioned something that was pretty interesting. You said that you made some of the bigger mistakes early on, and that could have been in, like when you were working with racquetball. Do you recall anything in particular? Like, say, if I was founding a business, like would the would any of these mistakes be something that you would kind of want founders to know or to kind of like understand before getting into this entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's tough because it's kind of different for every business. And you know what's I'm trying to think of the right way to word this. So the fallacy is you don't want to make mistakes, but that's not accurate. You actually want to make mistakes, especially in business, because mistakes are actually how you get better and learn. You try to mitigate those mistakes and not make them disastrous, but you know, you need to find a happy medium of being risky and trying new things, and also not over risking to where you mm, you know really really make stumbles. But I mean, I can remember in the day, like in racquetball, it was actually very similar to the way pickleball is now, how there's a huge amount of recreational and amateur players, and then a very small subset of pros and tournament players and people who are locked into watching live feeds, and what you'll call the diehards. And I think probably the biggest mistake I made in racquetball that I'm doing differently now in pickleball is focusing too heavily on that pro side, tournament player side, which is really the smallest subset of the sport. And while it's fun and cool, and listen, I worked with a lot of pros in racquetball. There's not many pros in the sport over the last 20 years that I haven't at least had a t-shirt on at some point, you know, but that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of, management of personalities, it takes a lot of money, and while you're spending all your time, effort, and energy there's thousands and tens of thousands and millions of people on the other side of the sport that are your everyday customer, and it's very similar to pickleball now. And it's kind of one of the things that I see as a little bit of a, you know I think it's a mistake. It's everyone's got their own way of looking at it. But right now, whatever the numbers are, people say 5-6 million players in the United States. It's a huge customer base, but only maybe 100 to 200,000 are on that tournament side, who really care about you know all the pros, how who's going to win, Boca Raton this weekend, or Mesa, Arizona next weekend, or wherever the tours are. It's a very small subset. You know, to me, as a business, while you want to have kind of what I call tentacles into that side of the sport, you need to focus your marketing efforts into getting after the millions of people who are players. Because at the end of the day, those are the people who are your customers. So to package all that into what the mistake was, it was, basically getting too enamored with, the sexy side of the industry, and not overlooking, but sort of losing touch with the core everyday player. You really need that core everyday player, is the one that's going to make you, that they're going to buy your t-shirts, they're going to buy your paddles, they're whatever the product is you're selling. That's the person you want. Play your tournaments, plunk down your $200 to play in the the 4050 plus, that's your everyday customer. So that was a big one that I probably have learned from racquetball to this. Everything else is all just kind of, you know, you're going to find in business that every every day you're going to try something, and sometimes you'll think an idea is the greatest thing in the world, and it's going to fall on it flat on its face. Sometimes you're going to think an idea is kind of blah, and it's going to be a home run. And the moral of that is just try stuff. Try stuff and trust your gut, and be willing to learn from everything, whether positive or negative. There's definitely things that I've thought were going to be fantastic ideas in my past, and they were just dogs, and that's okay. You gotta chalk it up and say, all right, we'll try something new. But you always have to be innovating. You always have to be trying new things, because you never know what's going to hit. You never know what lesson is going to be learned that is going to be valuable for the future endeavor or thing you try. So that's kind of the advice there, is just try stuff. Be willing to take risks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I could totally agree with that. I think there's a lot of truth in doing things before you're ready. And also, like they say about like Edison, like it took him, he did like 1,000 light bulbs, and 1,001 was the one that was like the breakthrough. So taking a lot of risks, I think that, and trying like often makes a lot of sense. And is there like, is this entrepreneurial spirit, did this come from like someone in your family? Like, where did this kind of start? I know you mentioned you had it kind of always interested when you were starting up racquetball, but wasn't sure if this came from a particular, maybe a book or person.
It's funny. I actually get that question asked a lot, and I can't really trace it to anything. Really, I always had just a general interest in it. But even in college, like I mean, I went to college and my master's for marketing, so I didn't really take classes in entrepreneurship really at all. I did have a couple of professors in college that ran some of the marketing programs very kind of entrepreneurial and kind of business forward, not academic forward. And that always I was always drawn to that. And then when, early on in college, I started running the team, and, it's just kind of slowly built and grew. But then what really kind of set me off on the path was coming out of grad school. I actually took a job with a company that designed and built large scale trade shows and exhibits for high end broadcast companies. So we did like giant 200-foot trade show booths for like NBC Universal, Turner Broadcasting, Nickelodeon, really cool stuff. And one of our biggest clients was NBC Universal. And at the time, there's this thing in media called upfronts, which is when all of the TV stations or networks come together and showcase all their new TV programming for advertisers. And it's usually just done in like a big auditorium. They show video and clips and stuff, and then they throw a big party. Well, NBC created this giant walkthrough for their media people, and they transformed Rockefeller Center in New York City into essentially an immersive NBC experience. And my boss and I, we were a team that ran all these programs. We kind of got that project at the same time we got this other project that was also enormous that she had been running prior to me. And there was this internal struggle of like, how do we manage both? We don't have the time, and I just kind of went in one day, and I don't even know why I said this. I don't know where it came from, but this was kind of like the entrepreneurial light bulb, I guess you'd say. I walked in our office and I was like, I'm just going to take Universal and do it myself. And which at that level I was at the company just made no sense. Like no, whatever, I don't even know what my title was, but no one at that title would run a project, let alone like the largest project in the company at the time. And I was like, well, here's the thing. Like the other project in and out. I have to learn that one because I haven't run that one yet. We both have to learn this. Why don't we just split it up and I'll just learn this and run everything by you? So I just kind of like decided to myself that I was just going to take on this, $4 million, immersive experience for NBC, and it went great and it was awesome. And I just got it was so much fun to do that. And then at the same time, my kind of side business was starting to take off. And I was like, man, I think I really like I want to work for myself. I just wanted to own something. I wanted to, you know, I always had this thing where I want, if a success happened, I wanted it to be because of me. And at the same time, if a failure happened, I wanted it to be my fault. I just wanted it all. So I, one day, cut like 6 months, 7 months after that big event, I went in and I quit my job and took my business full time on a whim.
That's that's incredible. I mean, that's definitely a very interesting part. Like having to make that decision where you have that like $4 million experience with NBC, and you probably could have had like a very like cush salary and things like a very predictable kind of future, or you could have like taken the gamble and that risk on yourself. And you kind of mentioned how like you always wanted that side, your own side business, and be if you succeed, then it's yours. If you fail, it's yours. Is there anything else that kind of went into that decision, or maybe anyone else that was in that picture when you're making that call?
So my dad for sure. So I remember, I say that I quit my job on a whim. It was pretty much on a whim, but there was some thought to it. Um, the little bit of backstory was I had taken this job because the company was a really really cool company, but the salary was kind of lower than I would have wanted to take at that time. But I loved the opportunity, and to this day, I'll tell you, I love that job. If I ever don't work for myself, which I hope I that never happens, I would go back and do the job in a heartbeat. It was really cool. But the salary was a little lower than I might have wanted, and this was right when the recession happened, and the whole company took a 20% pay cut. So I was kind of put in a position where I was like, man, I was just at the point at the job where I was like, maybe I could get a bump in salary. Now we're all taking a cut company wide. It's going to take me so many more years just to get back to where I started from, which is still not where I want to be. So I went to my dad and I just asked his advice. He was in business his whole life, and I always kick things around with him. And I said, hey, I'm gonna, I think I'm gonna take this thing full time. And he had just retired. So he was like, well, listen, he told me to come up with a business plan, which I did. And he was like, I'm retired. I'll be here to help, whatever that means. I don't know. Like, he wasn't like an employee or anything, but he's like, as you're building this thing and you need advice, I'm right here to, be your eyes and ears for this kind of stuff. So he kind of gave me, I guess you would say, like the blessing of, this isn't the totally, stupidest idea I've ever heard in my life. And that was all I needed. I've always had kind of a healthy, unhealthy level of confidence. And I've always operated as a business owner in a very simple way, and this is like the biggest piece of advice I always give people. Um, the mantra I always say to myself in the back of my head is I can always pump gas. And what that means is there's always a job. If this thing blows up tomorrow, like, I'll go find something to do. So as a result of that, like, go for it. Don't hold back. Like, you can't hold back when you run a business. You have to sprint. You have to try stuff. You have to take risks. You got to be smart with all of those things, but you really have to put it all out there. From like a poker terms, you got to go all in. If you don't go all in, if you're not willing to go all in, don't run a business. It's just not the way you do things. So I always had that mantra of if I go all in and I go broke, it's okay. Like, it's not, that if you don't have that mantra, that fear can kind of take over your brain and cause you to make bad decisions. It's going to make you not take that risk or not try that thing you thought might be a good idea because, oh, I don't know, what if it doesn't work out? Well, it might not work out. It might be a bad idea. You might lose money on it. Like, it's okay. Like, you got it. You just have to put your chips in the middle, if you want to try and win the pot. That's kind of how I always looked at it.
Yeah, and sometimes that's kind of what you need, like that fear steering you from behind. It's kind of it's pushing you forward. Like, what if I go broke? What if it doesn't work out? I mean, that's those things that keep you up at night is exactly what you need in order to like propel you forward.
And there
But
are those nights.
yeah, you had, let's see. Okay, as far as like when you said your dad's, kind of giving you advice and he was willing to help you out. Is there anything else that Any other advice that really stuck out that you learned from him?
Oh God, all of it. um, you know, it's so hard to pinpoint one thing because it's been so many years. I think the a lot of the advice, interestingly enough, that you I've gotten from him just as a person is very applicable to business. And it's simple stuff like don't live above your means. Don't stay in your lane. It's that's a hard one. It's simple stuff. Um, he guides me on every single decision at this pretty much over the, like I always go, if he's going to listen to this at some point and then he's going to call me and say, I don't know what the heck you were talking about. You don't listen to anything. But that's just the nature of father-son relationship. But I definitely have, it's more the little stuff. I can't pinpoint. It's going to be a terrible answer to the question. I can't pinpoint anything major, but it's just all of the little things, and it's sometimes the things that, in the moment, you don't see. I guess that's probably a good way to answer this without sort of really answering your question. And it's when you do seek advice, whatever it is, whether it's my dad or whoever else you go to. A lot of times people will see something differently than you will because you're living inside it every day. And it takes those other people to kind of highlight the simple things that you might be missing, in order to drive your decision. So you should ask advice. You should always trust your gut. You should always, you know, not change your mind for other people, but you definitely have to, run things. You have to have a support system. You have to have a sounding board, because if you don't, you're you're always going to have that uncertainty, and you need that devil's advocate voice in the back of your head. So whoever that is for you, you got to find that person. So terrible answer to your question, but that one kind of had me stumped a little bit.
No, it works. It works. I mean, the people that are very close to you always say so many things. They sometimes go through one ear out the other, and some things really stick. But yeah, that's a really good point about like having a support system. I think um, that can definitely contribute to a lot of success. One question I had is, you said you kind of have this unhealthy level of confidence. Where do you think that came from?
I've always had it. I can't. There's didn't come from anywhere. It just came from competitiveness, really, and not being afraid to lose. I think that's probably where I got it. I have no idea. I've been an athlete my whole life. I've always been hyper competitive, um, and I think what's good about it kind of sounds egotistical. What's good about my confidence is it's very checked by realism, and I always used to think about this when I was playing racquetball. Every match I ever played, I could put in one of three buckets. It's a match that I should win every time. It's a match that I should lose every time. And then there's the 50-50 toss ups in the middle, and I could very easily, with very little confidence or a lot of confidence, but very much humbleness, put myself in any one of those categories, even the ones where I knew I was going to lose. But what was important was no matter what bucket that match went into, the second I stepped on the court, I thought I was the best. Now I remember that there was matches I played where I went in thinking the door closed and I was ready to go and I was going to, I knew I could win and I just got my butt kicked. And the second I walked out of the door, I was like, yeah, I was wrong. Got my butt kicked, So it's that level of confidence that you need to have, but also understand that you're not going to win everything. You're not the best at everything. It's not an ego. People think confidence is ego, and it's not. Confidence is just belief in yourself. Um, and if you're going to run a business, you have to believe that you're the best. You just have to. Now standing here, am I going to tell you that I'm the best at everything? No. But internally, to my own sort of inner monologue, yeah, I believe I am the best at what I do. That's how I operate. In reality, I could tell you I'm not. There are certain, like I think I like from a design standpoint and a creative and marketing standpoint, I believe I am the best. I know I'm not, but you have to have that belief in yourself, because if you don't, you get doubt. And when you have doubt, then everything goes to you know what. So you need to truly believe at all times you're the best at everything, because then if you see someone better than you, it's that belief that's going to drive you to want to beat them. And I see that all the time. Like I love competition. I love seeing, new companies, come into pickleball. That's competition. That's more people for me to beat, you know. When I remember in the early days of the US Open, there were a lot of vendors, and I would come back from the tournament and tell friends, like from racquetball, about how well, because at that point I was really heavily dipped into two sports, and I would tell them how well I did, and they're like, "Yeah, well, you're only doing that well because you're the only vendor." And I'm like, "No, I was one of six. Like there were four other clothing vendors in eyesight of me, but no one sold more than I did." That fueled me. I love seeing that. I want competition. I don't want to be the only game in town, because then there's no one to push me. But I want to be the best. I love seeing these big brands come into the sport. Because once again, this is one of those inner monologues versus outward facing stuff. But internally, I want to be better than Nike. I want to be better than Reebok or Under. Now I know I'm not. I'm never going to be one of those companies. But the belief in myself is, yeah, I can beat those guys, and I want to. I want to. I said it in the beginning. I want to be a disruptor. While I probably will never be a Nike, I could be a disruptor to Nike, and that means I beat them at something. That fuels me. That's what kind of gets me up in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need competition. Like everyone needs competition, especially like whoever's the best. Like competition brings the best out of you. You need an antagonist in the story. In a way, those two or six people, organizations depend on each other. Um, it's kind of like how innovation and new ideas come about too. It's usually ends up being better for the consumers as well. As far as that's like a good point, or like a good part I want to kind of talk about is big brands coming into sport. I'm sure it's not unfamiliar territory given you were in racquetball, but in like pickleball, I don't think Nike's taken like a big shot in here yet. But like Adidas, they have paddles, they have gear, and there's of course like all the different tennis brands who are coming over, and like they're kind of peeking over that fence and they're seeing what's going on. So like, have you thought about kind of like bigger brands and like being a disruptor to bigger brands? What do you kind of focus on in order to compete against them?
So it's interesting. So I put it in two different categories. Like I don't consider, the tennis brands coming in to pickleball, because if you make hard goods, if you're making rackets to then make paddles is not that big of a jump. It's pretty simple. You're already doing manufacturing. It's a different product. So really, where that question should be focused is on the tried and true clothing companies. And like the Adidas one's not even a great example yet, because they're coming in more on the hard goods side. They're not coming in on the apparel side. The only company, kind of big company, that's coming on the apparel side so far is Fila. And while I do think the others are coming, my thought process is the pickleball consumer is very unique. And only recently, and I would say in the last year or so, has the shift of the pickleball customer gone towards being brand centric. For the first 5 years of the company, pickleball people were pickleball centric. If you were in pickleball, it was great. I don't care what the brand is, Gamma, Onyx, yada yada yada. It doesn't matter. Pickleball's pickleball. It's pickleball first, brand second. Now you're starting to see some brand loyalty sneak into the game, and it's changing a little bit. But there's still a major focus of the pickleball customer is they want to support companies that are inside pickleball. So for us, by trying to create a product and a brand and a look and feel that can stand up next to the big brands, but while also telling the story of we're a pickleball company, because at the end of the day, listen, if Nike comes into pickleball, I know they just launched that goofy hooded or crew neck sweatshirt, with pickleball over a swoosh, but That's a baby step into the sport. I'm not even considering that yet. If these companies come into pickleball, all they're going to do is take the same products they sell in other arenas and market them to pickleball. Like you see that a lot right now with some of these like Instagrammy golf brands, that they have no interest in pickleball other than it's a fad. But they're like, hey, we're already doing this. We should come out with a couple of SKUs and see if it catches. So it's a lot of these companies that are just saying, oh well, pickleball is big right now. Let's just see if we can, take advantage of the wave. Well, we can't survive without the wave. The difference is any of those golf companies, if pickleball takes a nosedive in 6 months, they're going to say, all right, put those four shirts on, close out, and let's go back to golf. If pickleball takes a nosedive in 6 months, I'm out of business. I'm my company. Our story is we are the clothing brand inside the sport of pickleball. You're not going to see Kitch tennis. You're not going to see Kitch racquetball. You're not going to see, Kitch snowboarding. We're Kitch pickleball. It's in the name. We need the sport to survive. So by offering an elevated and high level product with an inside pickleball story, that to me is the competitive advantage that we'll have. Not over the big brands, because listen, Nike's Nike. If Nike comes in, people are going to want to buy. I own Nike. You probably own Nike. Like, I'm not saying Nike's a bad brand. I wear Nike shoes. I have Nike shirts. It is what it is. But they're not an inside pickleball company. They're a global apparel company. Now, could there be strategic partnerships that happen down the road where an outside company comes in and is looking for an inside industry partner? Sure. I think that's a great, avenue for us to look at down the road. But that to me is the story that makes sense. Is we are a company built by a pickleball player, formerly a racquetball player, and we're doing it for pickleball players in the industry. And we're not just pivoting to this sport because it's hot. I'm a diehard player of this game. I'm going to watch every single match on the live stream on the weekend. Like I'm in it. In addition to being someone who founded a company inside of it.
Yeah, absolutely. For the record, I'm Team Adidas.
Ooh, okay.
um, kind of going over like, yeah, so like Nike and all these other organizations, that I think they have their like kind of market fit, their like innovation. They've been doing these things for a while, but kind of wanted to bring it back to earlier. We had some discussions about support system, but like, what is your company's structure like? Like, what is your size? How many employees do you have? Like, do you have any business partners? Like, who is kind of your ride or die partner that helps you out? And is maybe if you have like a co-founder, yeah, things like that. Kind of a little more background of Kitch and operations.
I'm my own ride or die. We're a small company with a lot of independent contractors that we use for various things. I have a partner on the production side. I also have a partner on some of the marketing and promotional stuff that we're doing inside pickleball. But it's me, and that's another very interesting kind of dynamic within the sport, is that people in pickleball like to support companies where they know the person. And a lot of this for me has come from the US Open, because we see tens of thousands of people over the course of 2 weeks. And those people come back and see us every year and reach out throughout the year and become customers, and I learned this early on. And I didn't even really realize it, and actually until later. In the beginning of the years of the US Open, I would bring my dad with me down to the tournament, and he would be like my roaming sales guy in the booth. And he's a talker, he's a seller. He would have fun, make friends with all people, and he would just have the time of his life for a week. And now, since COVID and stuff, my parents don't come with me anymore to the tournament, but I'll still have people. Like just this past year, I was at the US Open, and some guy comes up to me, he's like, hey, where's the little guy with the gray hair? And I'm like, huh? They're like, yeah, the little guy with the gray hair, he sold me a shirt like 4 years ago. I wanted to come and say hi. I'm like, oh, that's my, and I tell like, oh, that's my dad. He's not here this year. Like, oh man, he was great. We talked for a while. When you get home, tell him I said hi. Like those touch points, really told me like people like the fact that they're not walking into my booth and dealing with a bunch of brand ambassadors or dealing with a bunch of like, hired people for the day. They're dealing with me. If you got a problem with an order, call me. If who's packing your shipment got me, so there's a value to that. Now we have grown and we do have help and we have other people doing some of that stuff now, but not losing touch of that personal connection has really been valuable. So we're not a big company, but we're not a small company either. We're probably standing to grow this year for sure. Um, but yeah, so it's a very bootstrapped company for sure. But now's the time where it's explosion time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's the sport is in like this really exciting phase where although it's been around for like 50 years, it still has this kind of new feel to it. It's has like this neighborhood mom and pop shop feel. You see the same people. It's like you said, it's not always just these reps. That could be speaking to, mostly just your brand and your company. It's very personal, but you can even be close to pros. Like you can see them. Some of these pros have like 2,000 followers on Instagram. You can like DM them and you get a response back immediately. Like, good luck doing that with like the NBA or the NFL. So it's cool to even see some of the same folks at these tournaments. Yeah, it's definitely a really neat time. What can people kind of expect next from Kitch? I know you said you like a heavy focus on apparel, and then you've got like some accessories that may be coming out.
Yes, this year's going to be interesting. We have a bunch of cool stuff going on. Some of it's kind of top secret, but the stuff I can say is, you're going to see a bit of a change in the style of our apparel, especially in the first probably quarter to half of this year. Um, we're redoing our website, and if you look at our website now, the majority of our apparel, our lane is lifestyle, cool colors, cool logos, bigger, more in your face kind of graphics um, on performance apparel. The style of pickleball is really more starting to change, towards that Tennessee look, simpler, cleaner, um, more professional, so to speak, just a higher end look and feel to the apparel. So we're going to be splitting our marketing between two types of apparel on our website. The stuff you see now, which is the larger graphics, cooler colors, stuff like that. That's going to be sort of our kitsch lifestyle collection. And then we're launching. We have a few items out there now, but we haven't really fully done the marketing push on the Kitch PB Sport collection, which is the higher end. We're going to be doing a lot more collared shirts, smaller logos, kind of a takeoff on the Nike tennis, Adidas tennis look. So it's going to be two different types of apparel you're going to see. Probably make a big push with that and launch for that at the US Open this year, which is where you'll see it for the most part as we slowly roll it out over the first quarter of this year. We're trying to get more into events, both large scale and smaller boutique events this year. We have a big tournament here in New Jersey, which is the New Jersey Open. That is kind of our landmark event of the year. Large pro tournament, has been in the past. It's going to be an amateur festival this year, but we're also going to start getting into smaller camps and clinics, destination travel style events, pop-up style events. We have a road tour that we beta tested last year, where we're sending a vehicle on the road to go set up at various smaller to mid-sized tournaments, just to try and put our brand in front of new markets that maybe don't know us as well as others. So really sort of putting more of a focus on elevating the apparel and getting back to grassroots marketing. That's kind of the big thing for us. There's some other stuff we're working on the teaching side and facility side, but that's all more to come. But this year is going to be an expansion year. We're hoping to build out continue to build out our pro team and ambassador team. Um, just really trying to, everything I do now is trying to get my brand and our company in front of what I call the Saturday morning player. Not necessarily the person who's going to, go onto YouTube and tune into the PPA or MLP, but the person who's going to the park on Saturday morning and playing for 3.5 hours. That's who I want to get in front of all across the country. So you're going to see a lot of stuff from us that really puts a focus on that side of the sport this year.
Awesome. I know plenty of those kinds of people.
We all
Um,
do. That's the lifeblood of the sport. You know, that's who's going to be driving the sport for the next, hopefully, more years than we know how to count. Um, everything else to me, I think is very cyclical and very volatile. Whereas I don't think the recreational side of the sport is volatile at all.
yeah, that seems pretty consistent. You mentioned something about building out a pro team. Are there any players that we would know about just asking for a friend?
So I can't really say who we're talking to right now, but I can tell you that we have a number of pros now. We have Johnson Cola, we have Cassandra Gerke, we have Althoff Merchant. Um, those players are going to continue. We have done some work with some other pros, but we're really trying to fine tune things this year. Our goal is, you know, two top males and two top females. That's kind of our focus this year, trying to figure out who those right people are. Because we don't, for us, it's not necessarily about finding the best player. The player is going to be on every podium or on every live. It's really finding the player who is marketable, who has an interesting story. It's the biggest thing I think that's missing right now in pickleball is the focus when you watch live pickleball or pro pickleball. It's basically just on who wins and who loses, and how good the feed can look, and how nice the graphic boards can be in the background. Yeah, and it's a pretty picture when you turn it on, but that's not to me really where pro sports is right now. In the year 2023, you know, pro sports is sort of becoming less about the wins and the losses and the plays on the field or the court as it is about who the people are that are on those fields and those courts. Social media has done that. Social media has given, you know, athletes a life off the field. If you go back, I'll use like a Jets reference, like Joe Namath. All you knew is kind of what you saw on TV. You didn't know Joe. No one knew who this person was. With social media, you get a very intimate look at the inside of people's lives. And that there's value to that, and no one's really telling that story. So as we're looking to build out our team, we want great players, we want good athletes, we want good people, but we want interesting people. We want people who have stories that we can tell. We want people who can generate content that people want to see, and people who are dialed in to not necessarily just focusing on what happens inside the 44 by 20-foot box that they play pickleball in, but what happens when they step off that court, what happens in between matches, what happens, at the hotels or in the parking lot. That's the player we're looking at. So, hoping by, the next month or so, we're going to have some interesting announcements to make on players, but it's a tough landscape to work in right now with pro pickleball. It's really difficult. There's agents involved, there's tours involved, there's all kinds of different marketing and sponsorship arrangements that you have to function within. So it's very challenging, but we're, like I said before, I'm up for the challenge. I'll make it happen.
Yeah. When you spoke about the kind of like the difference between the Kitch Lifestyle Collection, what you're introducing, which will be the Kitch PB Sport Collection, and then you're talking about like building out a pro team, and some of these other ideas like the events, like destination travel, clinics. How do you know when a project or a campaign is successful or not?
For me, I mean, listen, the easy answer is you look at your bottom line. You look at if it makes money. Um, but that's to me not always been the most important thing. There are certain things that can lose money but be successful, or make money and not be successful and not be something that's going to stand the test of time. Um, I can tell you, I have, and this is not necessarily good advice for anybody because there's no science to it. For me, it's pure gut feeling. I and I think that's what kind of makes me good at what I do is I have a really good grasp from a gut feeling perspective of when to keep going on something and when to pull the plug. you know and what I try to do is you always try to push a little bit farther than when you think the plug should be pulled, because it's like almost when you get to that point, you try to give it its one last ditch effort and see if it works. Um, so I think you just have to, like we mentioned before, come up with an idea, be confident in the idea, plan the idea, and then go after it. But then just kind of trust your gut on when it's telling you, like, you know what, this is not a good use of your time. I mean, there's easy metrics, if you're trying to sell something and no one's buying it, well, there's a problem there. If you're trying to put on an event and no one's entering, well, there's a problem there. If I put out a T-shirt and nobody buys it, well, then nobody likes something about that shirt, whether it's the color or the design. So get rid of it. So you got to trust the metrics that every business has built in from a numbers standpoint. But then it's just gut feeling. You just got to trust your gut and don't fall in love with all of your own creative. At my core, I'm a creative person, and there's the old adage that artists don't make good business people, and I'm by no means an artist, but a creative person could be considered the same thing. And creative people can start to fall in love with their own BS, so to speak, and that's something I kind of learned early on because I used to buy into my own, and now it's like, you can't do that. You gotta trust your gut, but you also can't, be your own cheerleader. You gotta cut ties with something when it really wasn't a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you can hold some of those things a little too close to yourself. And also there's like sunk cost fallacy. So it was tough to make those decisions.
Yeah.
Um, so there are many reasons that can contribute to the success of a business. One of the most important factors is having a clear and compelling value proposition. Is there, something that really separates you from your competitors, something that maybe you saw early on or you're still seeing now? Yeah.
Um, you know, Twofold. One, and we hit on it before. I am the clothing company for the pickleball player. For the player by the player, that type of thing. But then, from an inside company standpoint, we are a small company that can achieve big things, and that's what really sets us apart from our competition. Um, Especially when it comes to, we do a lot of custom printing work and shirt printing work for the pickleball industry, kind of behind the scenes. And if you take a look at, some of the smaller cap clothing companies in the sport, you go to them and you're like, hey, we have an event coming up. We need 1,000 shirts. Those companies have no idea how to even make that order happen. Well, for us, we're doing 1,000 shirt runs all the time. So we are able to really pull off large scale projects, but do it as if that customer was coming to us with an order of 10. I treat every order the same. Whether you're ordering 10 shirts or 1,000 shirts, you get the same level of customer service. That's important. Everything's important. One, because if you agree to take on a project, it's your job to make sure you do it to the best of your ability. The other is, you never know when that 10 shirt job from that client blows up, and now they're the 1,000 person client, 1,000 t-shirt client. So the value proposition really comes down to giving people the small family business feel with the output of a large company. I think that's what sets us apart. Is really it's that customer service side.
Yeah. I mean, everything you just said kind of gives me that like Northeast. I'm not surprised, your shop is up in New Jersey. It's New Jersey, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I'm from Virginia, but definitely have that Northeast uh, business mentality. It's something I always appreciated about whenever you go up to New York, New Jersey, you go to Philly. Um, they always take care of the people. And they always like you said, whatever you take on, you do it to the best of your ability. It doesn't matter the size of who you are, the size of your company. You're always putting out the best, and have a very high standard. Never count yourself out. But is there a book that you have read that has maybe not been directly correlated to your business, but who you are as a person that has changed you?
That's a bad one for me. I'm not a book guy for sure. I am a TV guy, and I am a kind of studier of businesses. So it's very cliche at this point to say, but Shark Tank has had a very big effect on me, um, and studying the success of other companies has really been something that's been important to me. And one of the companies that I've always, it's kind of the company that really was the launching point for the first business I ever started was Tap Out. If I don't know if you're familiar with like UFC and mixed martial arts.
Yep, I used to be a professional MMA fighter, so that definitely rings a bell. That's funny. I haven't heard that word
There
in
you
a
go.
long time.
Yep. So Tap Out was the t-shirt company for mixed martial arts. Back in, if you go back 20 years, if you didn't watch UFC or train MMA like you did, you didn't know what Tap Out was. Now Tap Out's, a global brand, but you know, I watched the launch of that business and how they, were selling T-shirts out of the trunk of their car and, really focusing on the athlete. And I studied that company like crazy, um, and that had a big influence on me. And so, interestingly enough, tap out is a way to win a mixed martial arts fight. So that's how they got the name. The best shot you can hit in racquetball is rollout. So rollout was the name of my first company. So it was really, really correlatable. And there's a quote from Charles Lewis, who was the guy who founded Tap Out. You probably remember he's the guy that had the face paint on. They called him Mask. Um, he had a quote that said, "I may not touch a million people, but I might touch that one that touches a million." And I've had that quote on a magnet on a paperweight on my desk, and I've always looked at that, and what that always told me was, you don't necessarily have to be that person who gets famous, so to speak, but you never know by the what you do in business and what people you partner with and what people you influence. One of those people might be the one that goes global or viral or makes it big, and by partnering with the right people, you can be a catalyst for those individual successes. So while not a book guy, definitely a studier of businesses and a TV guy.
Yeah, hey, TV I think is definitely a powerful new medium. Um, I appreciate that quote, and yeah, hopefully this podcast can serve as um, a medium for that one person who's out there who can, kind of change the world or touch a million people.
Yep.
Where can people find out more about Kitch? What's your social media? Feel free to kind of do your plug here.
Sure, absolutely. So our website is kitchpickleball.com. And it's pretty easy. We're at Kitch Pickleball on all the major social media platforms. Pretty much Facebook and Instagram are our focuses right now. We're launching a YouTube page this year for sure. I haven't ventured into mastering TikTok yet, but it's on my radar. Um, so find us on there. You know, on our Instagram, we're going to be promoting heavily this year the events we're going to. So if you see that we're going to an event, come up to the booth, say hi, hang out with us. Like we very much want to be, you know, that VIP experience for people at tournaments, where they can come have a good time and, hopefully buy a t-shirt and rep our stuff. But we just want to meet pickleball players. We want to get out in front of people and really tap into this amazing community and social element that the sport brings to the table. Um, it's been it's been an awesome ride, and what's fun is, as crazy as the last whatever 6-7 years have been, we haven't even we as a company and the sport hasn't even scratched the surface yet. Um, it's I joke that it's frustrating that the sport feels like it changes, at least once a week at this point. But that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it challenging. That's what makes it, it's what keeps you on your toes and keeps you hungry to want to be better. It can be frustrating for sure, because it's like once you feel like you have a strategy going, someone makes a Facebook post and then the whole pickleball world is thrown into a frenzy, but as long as you keep to your like you said, your value proposition and stick to your guns, you can be nimble, you can change, you can roll with the punches, so to speak. And God, I don't know where this sport's going to be in 5 to 10 years, but I feel confident that we're going to be a part of it wherever it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, come say hi at the Kitch Pickleball booth. You just look for the short guy with the gray hair. Look for that. Um,
Pretty soon,
yeah,
I'm going to be the short guy with the gray hair soon.
yeah. But yeah, really appreciate your time and really appreciate you being open and transparent about the successes, the setbacks, challenges about your business, giving an opportunity for others to learn from your mistakes, I think is very important. It's also just important to make their own mistakes as well. But, it doesn't hurt to live vicariously through others and avoid some if you can. But really appreciate your time. And again, Kitch Pickleball. This was an episode with Jonathan Clay.
This was awesome. I appreciate it. Yeah, best advice I can give people to leave this with is, if whether it's in pickleball, outside of pickleball, if you want to start a business, if you do your research, do your homework, ask yourselves all the right questions before you do it. But if all those things check out, go for it. Just try. Whether it's business, life, whatever, just try stuff. Be take risks. If living it, taking it the safe road, it's no fun in the end. You gotta put yourself out there and take risks. And I promise you, win, lose or draw, you will thank yourself as a result of it, and it's going to make the ride a lot more fun.
Awesome. I don't have anything to add to that. It's perfect closing.
I appreciate it.
Yep.